Welcome to Fizzygoo Gaming. In the How Do Dungeon Masters series of videos, we're going to look at the nuts and bolts of running a tabletop role-playing game. Despite the title and the back and forth use of GM and DM, these videos are mostly system agnostic and are made in order to help you run your game with more goodliness. With this video being the beginning video of a series, let's begin by looking at the beginning of DMing. I'm going to use the word fun a lot in this video. Here, fun doesn't mean happy, or at least it doesn't mean just happy. Fun is a shorthand term for overall entertaining, and entertaining includes inducing emotions in yourself and your players through playing the game. If the players are stressing out over figuring out how to avoid a trap, or are filled with fear at the unseen creature that has been dragging them through the basement of the farmhouse, or are laughing at the antics of a PC in a tavern, all of those constitute fun. If you, the DM, are scared when one of your players deals a massive blow to the current main villain, or you become giddy at finally smacking down the nigh impenetrable paladin, those too constitute fun. One final note before we begin is to acknowledge that this is not meant to be an end-all be-all, the only way to DM GM. This is advice, suggestions, things that are good to look out for. It's a discussion, and it's possible I might get things wrong here and there. I hope not. And at the making of this video, I don't think so. But I'm open to criticism and pointing out other ideas or options that may enhance or contradict what I've done here. My belief is everyone can DM. In the beginning, it's rough, but trying something new is always rough. One of the major skills needed to DM is empathy for your players. Note, this empathy is for other people at the table, not necessarily their characters. Empathy is a skill. You may be inherently more or less empathetic than the average human, but you can always work on increasing your empathy, and RPGs are a great arena to do so. Despite all the numbers and stats and rules, RPGs are about feelings. Rushes of joy at overcoming challenges, moments of terror at encountering monsters, feeling sorrow at the loss of a PC, and for the DM, the joy is in sharing these moments with the players. Many times you instigate the events that create the feelings, other times your players will surprise you as their actions take the lead. But overall, you need to use empathy to place yourself out of the spotlight of the game. A villain you control may have the spotlight, but it should be the villain's, not yours. And the reason the villain should have the spotlight is so that the PCs can then emerge from the darkness to take the spotlight for their own. Because the PCs, and by extension the players, are your focus. You, the GM, must give the players and their characters the space to have agency within the world that you're ultimately in control of. And protecting player agency should be the DM's number one concern. It's common to describe campaigns as either linear with a set group of adventures, often pre-made and published adventures, or as sandbox. But the truth is, in tabletop RPGs, it's always a sandbox. The PCs always have the ability to go in the opposite direction of where the linear campaign has been designed to go. The goal of the DM is to not become overwhelmed or scared by players and their PCs going off script and into unknown, unplanned worlds. Players are cats, and the GM can either be miserable by trying to constantly herd the PCs, or the GM can have fun by engaging with and playing with the PCs. And here, we recognize that empathy for yourself as the DM is also important. Say you've bought a published adventure, read it over, and then start running it for your players, but then several sessions in, the PCs take a hard turn off the published track into the unknown. It's okay to recognize that you're not prepared. If you're close with your players, you can just tell them, I need to go get my notes up to date for where you're going, so I should end this session early. If you're not close with your players, or if you just want to play your cards close to your chest, then throwing in a random encounter, combat or otherwise, can give you the space to fill out the rest of the session so that you can plan for their detour next session. There are many reasons as to why you choose to become a GM. Maybe you like world building, or maybe you like creating interconnected social networks of interesting and often malevolent characters who have grand schemes, etc. But for an RPG, the most important reason to be a DM is to facilitate the play of your players. This isn't to say this must be your favorite reason, only that it must take precedence over all other reasons. What does this mean, facilitate the play? The TLDR is have fun, or make sure everyone at the table, the players and yourself, are having fun. It means you're there to entertain the players by having the world react believably to the players' actions. It means you're there to help negotiate the confusions and disagreements that arise in a group that is sharing and co-creating an imagination-based experience. It means you're there to interpret and reframe what the players want with the best intentions. For example, if a player says, "My character walks down the hallway to the iron door at the end," then it's fair to reply with, "As you walk down the hallway, about halfway down, you hear a click. Make a dexterity saving throw." But if the player says, "My character, using that thingy, goes down the hallway to the iron door looking and stuff," then it's on you as the GM to ask for clarifications like, "What thingy?" And with looking and stuff, does that mean you want to spend an action every 5 feet actively searching for anything in particular? The mistake that DMs, both new and old, can make is failing to recognize when they, the GM, needs to ask a player for clarification on what the player wants their character to do. If you fail to accurately understand what the player wants and something bad happens, you'll often hear the player exclaim, "That's not what I wanted to do," or "That's not what I meant when I said X, Y, and Z." But if you accurately understand and something bad happens, the player is more likely to say something like, "Oh, and you can train yourself to go the extra step of reiterating what a player says they want their character to do so that the player can hear it, and then allow the player to make corrections before they take the action. Or if you realize the player hasn't thought something through, you can pause the action where it would make sense. For example, the player says, "I keep chasing the kobold lovers and swim across the river." As a bad GM, either in malice, bad faith, or just failing your empathy check, you could reply, "Okay, halfway across the river, the current starts to sweep you away while your plate mail starts pulling you to the bottom. Make 2 swim or strength checks." But as a good DM, in order to make the world more believable, you could reply, "Okay, because of your single-minded focus on getting the kobolds, you actually get nearly knee-deep into the surprisingly swift currents of the water before realizing you're about to swim with plate mail armor on. Do you want to continue into the waters?" The vast majority of players are willing to take responsibility for the choices they make for their characters. They recognize when they've screwed up, and that's part of the fun. As a quick aside, granted, there are some players who are like the in malice or in bad faith GMs, and you may have to not DM for them, which could mean asking them to leave or not inviting them back. I plan to make a separate video on dealing with problematic players. So all of that is to say, your number one most important cornerstone reason for DMing is to facilitate the fun. The next important aspect to being at least a respectable GM is to know the rules. This doesn't mean that you have to know every spell and ability and monster stats and background novel read and memorized. Not at all. What it means is to have a good familiarity with the basic mechanics that help determine the outcome of events that the characters couldn't just reasonably do without needing a dice roll. For D&D and Pathfinder, the basic mechanic is the D20 roll, plus modifiers, and the result is compared to the difficulty class of success for the action. A die roll, after all, means there's a chance for failure, or at least for the average human in the setting, there's a chance for failure. The heroes and villains in the setting may have high enough bonuses and modifiers to make some rolls a sure thing, or even a sure failure. So the first criteria on when the GM should call for a PC to roll is if there's a chance for failure. And by here, chance for failure, we mean that either success or failure, or both, will have a meaningful effect on the game, its current story, plot, etc. The difficulty class for a roll determines the base chance for failure. PC modifiers adjust the chance up or down. The greater the chance for failure, the more likely it is that you should require a roll. When to make a roll is largely up to the GM. And the second criteria after the chance for failure should be, is it fun? For example, if a PC wants to cut a rope with their dagger, should it require a roll? Just on its own, cutting a rope is a trivial action within a game of dangerous monsters and magic. So just on its own, no, it shouldn't require a roll. If the PC is just at a stable and wants to make a sort of leash for a goat out of their 50-foot rope, then no roll should be required unless you're playing a comedic campaign where a player risks several rounds of failure in cutting a rope for a goat. If the PC is at a tavern and wants to secretly cut the rope tying a villain's captive to one of the support posts in the busy main room, then a roll to cut the rope is less useful than a roll to do it stealthily. If the PC is on a boat tied to the docks as a horde of screaming demons rushes in, then a roll to cut the rope here will heighten the tension, increase the fun, because failure, however slight, means the demons get that much closer. If your group of players enjoys tactical combat, then essentially every roll to hit is fun. But if your group is largely non-combat focused, then it may be more fun for the group to narrate the PC's winning easy 5th edition level encounters or trivial and low Pathfinder 2nd edition encounters, and possibly losing if the encounters are 5th edition deadly or Pathfinder extreme. My suggestion to first-time DMs is, for combat, roll it out. Gauge people's level of fun in the rules standard combats, and then make changes, and publicly announce them to your players, in either later tiers of play or in your next campaign. And by tiers of play, I mean the level tiers, as in tier 1 is levels 1 through 4, tier 2 is levels 5 through 10, and so on. So if you wanted to make such a change, then wait until the party reaches a new tier, and then let them know that now that they're at this level, easy encounters will largely be narrated rather than rolled. And by campaign, I mean the totality of gameplay undertaken by one group of players and their PCs in a cohesive timeline from beginning until the GM says something like, and so the campaign ends. So you're aware that you need to be empathetic with your players, that fun is the goal, and that you need to be familiar with the rules. How do you implement it all? DMing has a natural ebb and flow to it. A typical session starts as follows. DM, narrate the current scene, then ask for PC reactions. The PCs, describe reactions. DM, reiterate key PC reactions, narrate results, then ask for PC reactions. PCs, describe reactions, and so on. At any point, something in your narration or in the PC's reactions may bring about a need for a roll or other rules adjudication. For example, DM. In the late morning, while you're heading south on the trail, you realize that you haven't heard any birds in a while. In the moment after that realization, you see a large clearing in the woods to your right, about 20 feet from you, through the trees, is where it starts. In the clearing, just at the edge of the woods, about 50 feet further south, you can just make out the side of a dilapidated barn. Just as you notice all this, you hear a deep, unearthly growl that seems to come from the barn. What do? Player 1, my character whispers, we should just move along. We're not here to help some farmer with a wolf. Player 2, it didn't sound like a wolf. Player 3, my character hems and haws as he looks around for tracks between where we're at and the start of the clearing. Player 4, my character draws his sword and begins walking boldly towards the barn. all the players, except for the tracking PC. The characters start to whisper to each other, arguing about what to do, trying to get PC4 from getting too far towards the barn. DM secretly rolls to see if the monster in the barn hears them as they've started to whisper loudly, but it doesn't hear them yet. Okay, DM says. Player 3, roll to see if you find any tracks. Player 3 rolls a success. Okay, about halfway between the clearing's edge and the trail, you find some deer tracks that lead about 15 feet towards the barn, and then there's days-old dried blood caked on leaves and on the trunks of trees up to about 10 feet above the ground. The deer tracks end here, and there are no other tracks. Player 3. My character returns to the party and tells them what she found. Player 1 says, well, that doesn't seem like a wolf. I guess we better take care of this thing before it hurts more than a deer. This ebb and flow is also found in combat, though much more granular. After initiative, the ebb and flow is as follows. DM rolls attacks, actions for an enemy, then narrates the outcome. Player describes what they want to do, rolls attack actions for their PC, narration of the outcome. Repeat either DM or player for the next agent in the initiative order, and so on. Asterisk there. Some players like for the GM to narrate the outcome of their actions in combat, while others prefer to narrate it themselves. The GM will always have the final say and may have to adjust a player's narration to fit the overall events, like clarifying that the ceiling was too low for the overhead swing of their axe, and the player described it so it was more of an angled swipe without changing the die results. That's basics how to DM, and it's very simple. Narrate, let the cats loose, narrate the outcomes of their antics, let them be cats again, declare combat if they pull out their claws or if the dog NPC gets involved, narrate the combat. Now, by narrate and narration, we mean describing things, and by describing things, you want to put some flavor into it, not too much, but enough to get some feelings across. Weather, sound, lighting, and overall environmental mood are good cornerstones to set an opening narrative's feelings, as well as the actual moods of NPCs, if there are any. Does the tavern crowd look scared or defensive as they speak in quiet and hushed tones? Do they look drunk and cheerful as they sing and dance? And so on. In combat, the facial reactions, quick quips, and apparent morale of enemies are good cornerstones for inducing feelings there, as you want to avoid a dry roll, number, hit, miss, damage value, move on combat, as the bare numbers do little to immerse you and the players in the encounter. The when and where in GMing are interconnected and develop from the ebb and flow of the how. When and where is picking up on where you, as the DM, need to get involved with the PCs and their actions, as well as where to insert yourself into the game. Both players and their PCs must interpret the game through your descriptions, narrations, and in-game actions, and both players and their PCs can mishear, misunderstand, misinterpret, or just outright miss information you've provided to them. And same goes for you as the DM in listening to and understanding the players and their PCs. The easiest when-where to recognize is when dice rolls are needed. The GM is the one who steps in to narrate the outcome of the dice rolls, how successful and failures manifests. The middle ground, not the hardest, not the easiest, is during general role-playing when the PCs are in a scene where there are plenty of NPCs to interact with. The PCs can talk to each other, to other NPCs, and the NPCs can engage the PCs to either distract them or put them back on their current adventure path. NPCs can be used to correct misunderstandings that the players have, while possibly furthering an in-game misunderstanding that the PC has, or otherwise correct mistakes that were made by the DM or the other players without having to step out of the immersion and the DM correct the players, which is fine, but best is the last option to use in most cases. The hardest moments to recognize when and where you should insert yourself as the GM are when the PCs are role-playing and they are alone, as this almost always will require a GM to player rather than NPC to PC discussion to clarify the situation. What it comes down to, though, is that anytime a player is about to have their character act on wrong information that the player has, then you as the DM needs to interrupt and clarify for the player. This also means you must assume the baseline knowledge that all your players' characters have. In most cases, the PCs will inherently know more about the world they live in than the players playing those PCs. For example, a player wants their character to shoplift from a store in a city that is well known to the PCs. Before the player rolls to see if their character can stealthily do so, you should inform the player that their character knows that the laws in the city are quite harsh and that thieves caught in the act have their right hand crushed under specialized scales of justice and then are dropped into the city's oubliette for a year. If the PC still wishes to attempt to steal, then that's fine, but you have provided the player with the knowledge that the PC has that would help inform them about the action. So that's about it for a very beginner's guide to DMing, GMing a tabletop role-playing game. There's always more to talk about, delve into, expand upon, as well as errors to fix and updates to make. But taking these 5 points into consideration will help you in running your own game. Thank you, and have a great year.